You are listening to the Tank Magazine podcast. In this episode, Jan-Peter Westad talks with the writer Charlie Fox about his debut book, This Young Monster, which was published by Fitzcarraldo Editions earlier this year and has been praised by the likes of John Waters and Chris Kraus. From Stranger Things and David Lynch to Lee Bowery and Arthur Rimbaud, the essay collection takes a piercing and playful look at all things monstrous, celebrating artists who find beauty within the dark and the disturbing.
I guess we could start with, you wrote a piece for Tank in the party issue. Interview situation, not unlike this.
Yeah, it's interesting. They were kind of like weird meta loopy situation we like worked ourselves into. So the piece is called Zonked, and it's an interview between a psychiatrist and a mutant in a kind of rehabilitation facility somewhere in some sort of undefined present, some kind of bizarre environment, I suppose. And the mutant in question has drug problems, but what they're really trying to cure him of is his abnormality, physical abnormalities, the fact that he can mimic any voice that's put to him, or the fact that he can puke glitter and things like this. And he's kind of going through his medical history and his own feelings about having this like science fiction condition and just mouthing off.
It fitted in, I thought, with the essays from your book as well, This Young Monster, because it's a kind of playing with voices and then going into sort of criticism or critique. Was it at all part of the wider essays?
I like the idea of doing something like that. I mean, I just like the interview as a form because there's always like a weird power thing going on. There's like a sort of sense of that the control is always unequal, like who's really in charge of the interview and how much personal information you can just like bleed someone of whilst you're talking to them, that you can just kind of drain them. And it can be really uncomfortable and really painful. No, but you can get these like weird moments of poetry out of someone when they're being interviewed. You're able just to sort of lay their brain out and dissect it straight away. And I like that idea. I like the idea of that signal being warped a bit. And like, I suppose where it does echo the book or mimic the book in some ways is that fiction and fact get warped too. The two things are kind of running together. So you have a kind of imaginary voice, but it's speaking in a very direct way, speaking in like almost like a sort of TV documentary, kind of imagining like what it would be like if there was like a TV special about mutants in rehab. Very straightforward. There's nothing like fantastical necessarily in the way it's delivered. It's very deadpan, but all the time it's kind of pulsating with this hideous strangeness. So I just like those two substances like mixing together, making something kind of evil.
I was wondering actually, because obviously you're playing with voices a lot in the essays. You've got like sort of plays and interviews and stuff. But there's also a sense of an overriding character or voice that's sort of half yours, half imaginary sort of self. How much does that continue throughout the book, do you think?
I think that's definitely there. Also because I like the idea of like the mask kind of melting. It's artificial. It's not totally sincere ever. It's not like you can ever really get away from yourself. It's always like a sort of malfunctioning hologram or something, or like the Wizard of Oz, that you know that there's just some sort of trickster pulling the levers, that the smoke's going to dissolve and you're going to be left with something that's quite kind of filthy underneath. And I just like, so I never wanted it to be like, it's not this plausible thing of like, I can just alter my voice at will. It's supposed to have this element of something degraded behind it, like a glitch, or like when you record your voice and there's something wrong with the tape and it hiccups and distorts and things like that. So you never really know how much of the illusion is like real. It's always going to be flickering in and out and changing, because I like the idea of being on this like unstable sort of marshland.
You can feel it reading it as well. You never know exactly where you're going to be next or what you're going to talk about. Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect.
Yeah, I think that's like a fun, or something that I really get off on in a way that I can't really control. I just like the idea of it suddenly being turned inside out, that it's just a way of stopping myself being bored. Like there's a moment in the monster book where there are two characters talking in this play on Halloween night. One's a witch and one's a vampire, skinhead vampire called Klaus, and they look out the window and Michael Jackson is there dressed as the scarecrow from the Wizard of Oz, and there's a wind blowing and he's talking to like a velvet raven puppet on this tree limb by the light of the full moon. And it was just because I'd like reached this juncture with this play where it's like I need something else to happen. Like just like the idea of like throwing like some fireworks into the room and just allowing something just to go off, because otherwise it becomes it just becomes predictable.
You've got that great chorus.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the trick-or-treaters.
Yeah, I love that line. They just pop up and say something like, "No one's ever created anything except to escape from hell." And it's like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, that's the whole thing. And then at the end of it, they howl like wolves. So they become like the classic Dracula kind of chorus of the children of the night, as Jonathan Harker goes into like meets Bela Lugosi. So I like this thing in just a really fundamental way of just taking like pop cultural junk and then just warping the context around it so it assumes this other meaning. So all the meanings and things start to kind of turn into liquid or start to grow fur or something. So it's like this kind of hallucinogenic effect you get where the signal's coming from the wrong place and taking on other meanings. Like I found this thing the other day. You know the end of The Shining when Jack Nicholson's like frozen to death and he's like kind of covered in ice and is like brain dead. Somebody had like recreated that photo, but I don't know whether it was with one of the kids from Stranger Things or one of the kids from It. And I just like that like disjunction. There's something really disturbing about things not being in the place where they should be, but really satisfying at the same time. So I always like to scramble that. And that is what's going on in Zonked as well. Yeah. In this piece, because it's like taking a certain kind of like even over familiar like clinical situation or something and then plundering science fiction, plundering The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, and then allowing them to come together in this kind of sloppy punk collage kind of way, like Frankenstein's monster kind of assemblages of all these weird trashy influences and kind of things that I just want to like lick and bite and stuff.
It seems to be a real moment for that as well. The return of the 80s nostalgia and horror. Do you feel like you're coming out of that, or do you feel it's weird? Do you like Stranger Things?
Yeah, I do like Stranger Things a lot. I think Stranger Things is rad. I think it's really satisfying just seeing something that's so like flawless. They really got those textures definitely right, but at the same time, like there's something very strange about like that we've reached this point where you can just like counterfeit an era so accurately that your sense of history is completely thrown off, that it is basically an 80s show. You're actually like, your sense of the time is really gone, that you just can submerge yourself in this completely synthetic idea of what a time was. You can just time travel, and that the guys who made it, they were born in like 85, so even their memories of the 80s are completely drawn from the same, like, you know, from just VHS tapes and like junk in the attic. So I am like, yeah, I'm a child of that same thing. And I guess that there's something to be said of like, if you're from like our generation, that all of the media that you grew up with, all the formats that you grew up with are like extinct. And so there's like a weird pull to things like VHS tapes and CDs and CD-ROMs and stuff, because they now seem antiquated. So I do have like a real like fascination with this kind of trash anthropology, just because I feel like that's the stuff of that, you know, I grew up with, those like the trappings of my childhood, but they also feel very far away. They feel like there's stuff that's like buried somewhere out in a field that you have to dig up, whether it's like Labyrinth or like Chud that gets a shout out in the Zonk piece, or like it, just like a certain kind of analog degraded spookiness that I just have a big crush on. You know, like bringing all of that stuff together, it just gives me like a weird glow.
But then I guess the other side of what you're talking about a lot is not universality, that's too broad, but your references go really far. You've got like Rambo and stuff in there, and channeling that sense of monstrosity in everyone. I was wondering if you'd like to talk about Rambo at all.
Oh yeah, what a print.
It just threw you in somewhere completely new.
Yeah.
You could then suddenly sense throughout the whole thing. Like, I thought it was really great.
Oh yeah, I mean he's like, yeah, thanks. I mean he's like a hero. I mean, you know, he's just like this diabolical creature. It's something that you can't really believe existed, and even at the time, people were like, you know, they couldn't kind of fathom the fact that Rambo existed. This like 15-year-old prodigy, hell-raising child, you know, who had escaped from rural France, come to Paris, and was just causing chaos wherever he went. You know, jerking off into glasses of milk, starting fires, you know, stabbing Paul Verlaine in some seedy bar, some like sleazy bar or something. All of those like trappings are really like fantastic to me. Like, but also just the sheer like just the actual like the body of work, like Season in Hell and stuff, I just think of as just like just insanely beautiful. It wasn't just about the mythology of Rimbaud, although it's very attractive to me, the idea of that he was basically like a ghost, that you could imagine almost any kind of world for him, and you could imagine that he basically just walked within like the domain of his poetry, that almost there was no reality for him, that he would see kind of nymphs in the woods if he wanted to, because the kind of the vividness of like Season in Hell or Illuminations is so intense and so high def that I just like to imagine that he could basically just turn his head inside out and the stuff would be right there, you know.
How did the actual book come about? Because it's, you
The
know, we've been talking
origin
about
bit,
it.
yeah.
It's the origin story.
If you want to talk about like some kind of like personal mythology or whatever, that's like the abiding fascination of my life, that I would like walk around pretending to be a vampire when I was like 6 or 7 years old, or like I've always bought masks and like werewolf stuff and Frankenstein, and all of these things were just kind of like the trappings of my life for a long time. I would like, you know, spend time like trying to make like weird wounds and stuff, create makeup, or like write notes pretending to be dead. All these like morbid and monstrous things were like very much a part of my life. And then the enfant terrible thing as well, all of that stuff just came together. It was all of these things. But what happened was I was at home watching A Clockwork Orange. This was in like October 2015, and there's just this one line where Malcolm McDowell goes back home after he's had his like behavioural modification treatment, and the lodger, who's like living with his parents since he's been in prison, says to his parents, "I can't leave you two to the tender mercies of this young monster who's been like no real son at all." And like I was just sat there and I was just like, this young monster, that's what my book will be called. So literally in the course of that night, I like drew out, you know, what it would be, like what would you have in a book that was a monster book, a young monster book. And then I knew that I wanted the form of it to be mutant too. I needed it to shapeshift. I needed to go through these transformations, because that was like, that's how a monster operates. I hate a lot of writing about art, and so I needed to like firebomb all these sclerotic dead ways of thinking about stuff, just for me, just for my own like demonic fun. I want there to be a letter, and I want there to be a play, and I want it to move around, I want it to jump cut. I find it really tedious, really boring, the idea that it should behave a certain way. You always need to fight against that. You always need the ideas to misbehave. I didn't grow up with some like idea of being faithful to the canon. Like I grew up with junk food and skate videos and monster masks, and you know, books as like a cozy world or something. It isn't like that to me. Like books or any kind of art is like something illicit and dangerous. Like that's what it's for.
Childhood is such a huge part of this whole world, because you've got the imagination, the monstrosity, and the drugs as this kind of escape. A lot of that seems to be also channeling some sort of childhood energy. I was wondering, is this something you kind of felt as a child that you never grew out of, or something you were like rediscovering? There's that tension always between trying to hold on to it and then looking back on it.
The thing I like about childhood stuff, and like a particular kind of childhood thing, is like that children are just like these sort of demented goblins. There's just a kind of chaotic thing that you can just like grab hold of, this like demented spirit. And things like Alice in Wonderland and stuff, they, although they're like nominally for children, or they're like described as being for children in some way, I don't really think of them that way. I don't think about that division as being like a hardcore thing, that like childhood, you know, it never really dies. Like it's still there. Everything is really heightened. That's what it is to me. It would be like a kind of drug state, like a kind of hallucinogen state, that like a shadow like across the floor or something really has teeth. It really makes a noise. It really comes to get you. And I just like the thing of like being submerged in a certain kind of writing where there is no reality. There's nothing like faithful to reality. There's just this blizzard of terrifying stuff coming at you. There's just a kind of something that is going to devour you, something that's going to eat you, and everything, all of the sensitivity, all of the senses in that stuff will be super heightened and punched up and druggy and delirious. But like with drugs and stuff, I mean, obviously drugs are kind of circulating through the book all the time, and in some ways it's just a straight up thing about narcotics and what they allow, that you can disappear or submerge yourself or disintegrate or kill yourself, but also that like they have like a weird kind of mythology radiating off them, that they're just a kind of substance that you use to transform yourself. So it's not that different from like golden apples in Greek myth or whatever, or like a spell cast in an Ovid. in like Ovid's Metamorphoses or something. You know,
Yeah.
they're just like they're just things that allow you to get right down into like these hardcore parts of your brain and just let them melt. That's really attractive to me, and so drugs would be the same as like prosthesis, you know, like some kind of elaborate like Rick Baker makeup, or the same as art itself.
Yeah,
is
I
the
was gonna
thing.
say,
Yeah,
yeah.
art itself. Yeah, there we go. Because that's the biggie. Like, yeah, that's like the thing that you need to the stuff that really shakes you up, that pulverizes you, and it's just attractive to have all those things laid out, a mixture of textures, these different textures kind of meeting up and rubbing on each other and licking each other and stuff. So like you've got like some LSD here, and then you've got like the severed paw of the beast from the Cocteau film there, and then you've got like a Butthole Surfers album there, and then just like what kind of weird like witch's brew you could make out of all those things. That's where I like want to aim to be. So they're all like forms of disorientation, but at the same time, like with the childhood stuff in particular, it was kind of like weird to me that there isn't like a lot of stuff about childhood. I don't feel like taking into account that aspect of it, that we think about it as this time of innocence. We don't necessarily think of it as this time of fascination, derangement, being wild, being evil, like being totally amoral, and like that's kind of a wonderful thing. There's like that Peter Pan, like, if I don't know if you like read the original Peter Pan, like he's just this like punk. He's just like he's just going around, just like doesn't care about anything. He's just like you know that like William Burroughs must have had a huge crush on like the idea of the Lost Boys and everything, because they're just these kids just being evil. And I think that's like, it's to do with like our own squeamishness about ideas of innocence and ideas of corruption, that people don't, you know, they want to really believe in some idea of like paradise, but it's, you know, it's never there. Or like a real paradise would be a place where you could just, you know, cause no end of trouble.
They're also like the perfect audience for a lot of the transgressive, if you want to call it that, art that you're talking about. I remember watching Pink Flamingos when she eats the shit at the end.
Yeah.
And I watched that as a kid.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my god, what the hell, this is amazing. And now I think if I saw something like that, my reaction would probably be a lot less kind of ecstatic or excited, whereas it's just so fascinating. It's interesting to see how working at those boundaries relates much more closely to childish fascinations.
Yeah. Well, is this also like a thing of stuff that like hits you at that age? Like it's just sort of otherworldly. I mean, you really can't fathom like what kind of imagination would be like responsible for like a weird Godzilla looking drag queen who also, she was like the basis for Ursula in The Little Mermaid. As they used Divine as like, so she was already like weirdly familiar, because I saw it when I was like 12 or 13. I remember that like somebody told me that they'd seen this thing on Channel 5 and it was disgusting or something, and then like it was on again and I was like waiting for it, and then it happened, and you just can't imagine who would be responsible for like making this fantastical creation like eat dog shit. And that's like fascinating to like, I really like things that like disturb me at first. You know, I can't like understand where this came from, or it has some effect on me that's like makes me feel kind of ill, and then I like that and I want to have like more of it. I mean, I remember my similar thing with that was when I was about 11 or 12, I really wanted to see Blue Velvet. I'd read a lot about like David Lynch, and that kind of goes through the monster book too, but I didn't put this part in, and it was on TV and I had to ask this boy that I knew to tape it for me, because I don't know, I couldn't do it. I think my dad would have suspected it was like some sort of softcore thing. Like the title Blue Velvet, it already kind of reeked of some sort of illicit thing to me. So I was like, you know, I'll do it on the sly. So it was on a Friday, and it was the same Friday that The Order of the Phoenix came out, the Harry Potter book. So I remember reading that over the weekend, and then on the Monday, knowing I'd be able to pick up Blue Velvet from this kid. And like by the Monday afternoon when I watched Blue Velvet, like my childhood was over. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like the two things, it was like these perfect bookends. That like Harry Potter was done, and then like Blue Velvet came, and I was like 11 years old, and I finished Blue Velvet, and I was like, okay, that's it now. Like I'm into some other world, and it was so intoxicating to me, like knowing like this other thing was there. But the kid gave me the tape. It was like a big black sinister tape or whatever, with he'd spelt out Blue Velvet with blue stickers and like felt tip and glitter like on the side. He gave me the tape, and he He's like, I watched 50 minutes of this, and I don't know what it is, and I don't know why you want to watch it, but you're weird for liking it, and I never want to talk to you again. And I was just like, yes. Like, I was like, I can't wait to, like, I really want to watch this now. Like, how could it, what could have this kind of reaction? And he, like, gave it to me, and he was just, like, looking at me like, you're just ill. You know, this is just sick. And then, of course, like, I got it home, and, like, the first thing you see is just, like, you know, roses and blue sky. And I was like, wow, I wonder what happens.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it was so thrilling to me that this vortex opened up by that stuff, you know.
It also makes sense that you found it so weird. You can't put your finger on Blue Velvet. It's so eerie. It's sort of, if you weren't up for it, that would terrify you.
I was like, what's wrong with this kid? Like, what does he find such as, like, there's a Dalmatian and there's like sunshine and all this stuff, and like, but it's weird that I knew even at that time that it's like communicating this other stuff to you. Do you know what I mean? Like, you just have this sense of like that it's this pulsing there are these other meanings behind all this stuff, even when you had like a very dim apprehension of like what sex was, or like, you know, what like adults actually get up to. It was almost like this fairy tale explaining that stuff to you. So I always like took it in that way. To me it was like the same as like the Brothers Grimm or something, but it just happened to be in like the world that I sort of half recognized from like Buffy.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, like a certain kind of suburban sweetness. So I just was, I was just really into it. But you know, I didn't ever speak to that kid again. He never came back.
Yeah.
To me, what's like fascinating is just like empathizing with these weird things, or empathizing with these things that seem alien and being inside them. Like, to me, all this stuff is beautiful. It doesn't meet like a conventional definition of beauty or whatever. It's not like a Instagram sunset. But to me, the idea of Lee Bowery, of someone making themselves into this like magical creature and just living his life in that way, in a way that was just ruinous, but at the same time about his own private idea of glamour and shock, and that he wanted to just be this like singular chimera. To me, that's beautiful. Like, what could be more beautiful than just disorientating everybody, deranging everybody's idea about like what even is a person? Like, confusion is so sexy to me. Confusion, delirium, loss of control, things that when you look at them they kind of terrify you, but you're turned on by them, entranced by them at the same time. So to me it's really about not accepting some like bullshit school idea of what beauty is.
To hear more podcasts from Tank Magazine, be sure to subscribe through the iTunes Store. The theme music for this podcast is taken from Waiting Games by Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.